It feels like the last couple of years there's been a huge amount of nostalgia towards wanting to play handheld games again. And last year you could still kind of pick up a Nintendo 2DS or 3DS brand new through a retailer, not having to go buy a used one or pay a premium for one still in a box. And a lot of people did that a year or two ago. The thing is, now there isn't really a true new handheld out there on the market, unless you count the Switch Lite, that's going to be giving you that handheld gaming experience. And that's why a few months ago I talked on this channel about the different consoles coming from China that basically ceased to fill that role. The PowKiddy V90, it's essentially just a Game Boy Advance loaded with ROMs, and it plays pretty good. It feels decent for the $40 price tag. Or if you're willing to go down the path of buying a little console like that out of China that's preloaded with some ROMs and overall kind of shady, I would say buy a PSP, mod it, and get GBA games running on a PSP, because that's always my recommended way to people to go play GBA games today. I just think it has the right form factor, it plays them well, and it does a ton else. The thing is, the average consumer will neither mod a PSP or pick up a shady PowKiddy V90 out of China. The average consumer will only purchase a product like this if it comes with the Nintendo seal-on and is sold in a local Walmart or Target. But despite that, they have an overwhelming demand, I feel like, for a retro console like this to be re-released. We saw little Gamegears be re-released, Game & Watches be re-released, kind of as these sort of collector items just in the last couple of years. And prior to that, the SNES and the NES Mini were extremely popular. We know that even at a $100 price tag, loaded with 30 games, a little re-release of the Game Boy Advance with rechargeable batteries would sell like gangbusters. And I can't imagine that there's any reason other than this that these games have not yet been added to Nintendo Switch Online. We saw Nintendo Switch Online come out with the Nintendo 64 games, which I think eliminates the likelihood that there will be a Nintendo 64 Mini ever released. But the fact that the Game Boy Advance games have not been added to the system yet, and instead something like Sega Genesis games were put in front of Nintendo's own Game Boy Advance games, seems very surprising to me. And I feel like outlines a likelihood that maybe they're holding off on putting GBA games into Nintendo Switch Online because they want to release it in a standalone product. Despite the fact that I have a modded Nintendo Switch, ultimately I can play GBA games very well on there, both on the handheld and on my TV. I would still think this would even be cool, not necessarily even as a handheld, if it was either a hybrid and maybe it had a cord to plug in with an HDMI into your TV, or it was even just a set-top box in itself with a controller shaped like a GBA with a screen that didn't actually work, and it was just a home console but of the GBA. We know the GBA games actually look pretty good, I think, the pixel art on TVs yet. And I know that obviously the resolution of many people's TVs has risen, 4K, whatnot. These pixelated games, they don't look the best. But, I mean, we were re-releasing the Super Nintendo to play those games on, nicer HD TVs. And you got that sort of quality. So I think it's a similar sort of quality that you would get out of these GBA games. Even though obviously they were initially meant for a much smaller screen. And the GBA console itself is actually not that cheap to get your hands on anymore. The games, the system, they've all went up in price, and ultimately I think the best way to play it via playing them on either a DS model that has a Game Boy cartridge slot and paying the premium to pick up each individual Game Boy game, or buying some sort of Game Boy 360-in-1 or whatever cartridge that has a ton of games on one cartridge. And again, that's kind of like buying a PowKiddy V90. Unlikely that someone will actually do that if they're a more casual gamer, but it would allow you to play them on the original hardware. I've never used one of these multi-carts for the GBA. I've used a multi-cart for the DS, and it has worked quite well despite people's assumptions about DS multi-carts. It's worked great for me for something like 3 or 4 years now. And if you do buy the actual game cartridge and play the game on the official hardware, and maybe you already own the games too and you just haven't dug them out of your closet in a while, but you got a hankering to play them, you may find out that your batteries in the cartridges are dead and you've lost your save or the ability to save the game in the future because the battery in the cartridge is dead. And again, if we're looking at something that the average consumer is going to be able to do, they don't want to take apart their cartridge and replace the battery. And to buy another used cartridge, in all likelihood, its battery may not have a ton of time left on it either. These batteries are just sitting in there draining themselves over the past nearly 2 decades for most of these games. And That's why we need a product like this that can keep the GBA alive in an official way going forward with the original form factor ideally intact, and that's why a handheld would be best, but I would gladly take a home console version as well, just a little set-top box. While the best way to release something like this would be to pack, I said originally 30 GBA games on one system, odds are Nintendo will start way back at the original Game Boy, and they'll do this slow release where maybe the first year we get a Game Boy, the original, that little form factor, that handheld, maybe 30 games on. The next year, Game Boy Color, maybe 20 games on. And then maybe the next year, you finally get the GBA with, say, 15 games on. If they do this, they will milk it out and they will make it take years to get to the GBA, which is the one that I would really want. But I know other people have nostalgia for the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy. And arguably, the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color have such overlap that in an ideal sense, they should be in the same release. It's really a bummer that a ton of Nintendo games from like the mid-90s to the mid-2000s are only officially purchasable via a failed Nintendo console yet, that being the Wii U, because they've never been re-released for actual purchase, these Nintendo 64 and Game Boy Advance games, in any way besides on the Wii, where you can't buy them anymore, and the Wii U, which not many people have, and it'd be nice to see these games be officially re-released in some manner physically so that you could get them on their own little standalone platform. And it's not going to happen for the Nintendo 64. There's just no way with the release of it being added to Nintendo Switch Online, but still seems very likely to me that we will see something like this for the Game Boy Advance. Obviously, no release date, anything like that out there. All speculation, but I got to imagine it will happen at some point. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.